My name is Jim Lyons, Chair of the New Hampshire Realtors Risk Management Committee. With me today is attorney Matthew Johnson with the firm of Devine, Milibet and Branch, counsel to the State Association of Realtors. Today's topic is a very relevant risk topic dealing with audio and video recording equipment that might be present in properties that we have listed or that we're showing. So, Matt, how would you describe the duties of the parties, responsibilities and duties of, say, perhaps the owner of the property? What are they allowed to do by law in the state of New Hampshire?
Okay, so in New Hampshire, the rules break down differently. If it's an audio recording device, the rule is actually pretty simple. You have to have the consent of the other party to record their conversation or else it's a crime. So the rules are pretty simple. Video gets more complicated because you can video someone as long as that person has no reasonable expectation of privacy. If they do, then it's a problem. And obviously, as you can imagine, what is and is not a reasonable expectation of privacy is kind of a gray area. And the New Hampshire courts have not provided a lot of guidance. So an owner needs to understand if they want to use video, the best risk management tip is to make sure and get the consent of anyone else so that people know that they're going to be videotaped. That avoids a misunderstanding or a fight later over whether they were allowed to do it.
So that raises the question then of the realtor listing agent. What should they be dealing with in terms of their responsibilities or duties?
I think a listing agent's duty with the proliferation of technology is to add that to their checklist of intake information and check in with the seller and find out if they have such technology, do they intend to use such technology, and if so, make sure they get the consent of anybody to avoid any misunderstandings. And on the flip side, if the seller says they're not going to use this technology, make sure it's off and it stays off when any listings or any showings take place.
And the all-important part is the buyer's agent or the consumer or customer themselves. What would their responsibilities or expectations be when they're looking at property?
Well, the buyer's agent, I think, has two roles. On one hand, I think they need to educate their buyer client to make sure not to reveal any confidential information in the house, because you should assume at any point in time, and they should guide their buyers to assume that any place they go into may have audio or video recording devices. And on the flip side, they need to counsel and manage their buyers if their buyers want to take video or audio recordings in the house for whatever reason, to make sure that they don't let the buyers do that until they make sure they get the consent of the seller, because again, the consent avoids misunderstandings down the road. So those would be the roles the buyer agent really needs to have. And on the buyer side, they just need to be aware that they may be recorded and they need to act accordingly.
Interesting. And the devices are getting smaller and smaller and more popular all the time, but I think it's something that the public, when they're engaged in going out looking at property, that's just a thought that doesn't enter their mind.
I agree with that, and the flip side of that is because the devices are getting so much smaller and so much more prevalent, I think that's important that agents deal with it. And to that end, do you have some suggestions of what best practices might be for agents in dealing with these set of circumstances?
Sure. Yep. Well, I would say that after a buyer counseling interview, when a realtor is about to go out with buyers, it's great to have a conversation about what they should do, what they should do when they enter into a property. Best practice really is to tell people that we're going to see 2 or 3 properties today, and we should assume that each and every one of those properties is equipped with audio and video equipment. And it's fine to talk about the property, but wait until we come out of the property. When we get back to the car, then we can have a discussion about the property, but refrain from making any comments inside the property. Also, be aware that the seller could be watching or recording what happens there. So an agent would want to have very good control, always should, over where buyers are, rather than letting children, run upstairs or keep buyers together so that you can keep an idea of where they are within the property. Don't let them run amok, and be very respectful of the seller's property. Sometimes in winter conditions here in New Hampshire, we have sellers that leave a home in a certain order. They leave the heat on and off in certain rooms, lights off, lights on. So in a nutshell, really, you want to leave the property exactly as you find it. And that's important to remember. And if you do that, I don't think you'll ever get in trouble.
Great information. Thank you, Jim.